8 months pregnant, she runs into her ex-husband, his mistress, and the father-in-law who said she was worthless. And what happens in their lives is something no one could have imagined. The air on that September evening carried a hint of fall that lingered stubbornly, a chill that seeped into the bones and made Sophia clutch her wool coat tighter over her swollen belly. At 8 months pregnant, the world had become a landscape of small exertions and major discomforts. Every step was a careful negotiation with her own body, a precarious balance between the weight of the life she carried and the fatigue that built up in her back and ankles. Her belly, a perfectly round and taut globe under her dark knit dress, was her center of gravity, and at the same time the epicenter of a silent revolution that had turned her existence into a field of ruins and rebuilding. She walked through the opulent lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel, a sanctuary of luxury that seemed to belong to another dimension. The Italian marble floor, polished to reflect the crystal chandeliers like a nighttime lake, muffled the sound of her low-heeled shoes. The air was scented with an expensive blend of white lilies and the faint aroma of beeswax, a fragrance that screamed old money. In that universe, she felt like a fraud, a discordant note in a symphony of wealth and power that she had once naively believed could be hers. Her friend, Jessica, was waiting for her to have dinner. A renowned journalist whose life was a constant shuttle between Chicago, Washington, D.C. and the world. Jessica was in town for just 2 days, a strategic stop between a story on politics and an international conference. The dinner was meant to be an oasis, a bubble of normalcy and affection amid the methodical solitude Sophia had imposed on herself since her marriage imploded. It was a chance to breathe, to talk about trivialities, to forget, even if for a few hours, the abyss that had opened beneath her feet. As she headed to the elevator that would take her to the rooftop restaurant, a familiar vibration, the muffled sound of applause and instrumental music, escaped from one of the grand ballrooms on the ground floor. Out of pure curiosity, her gaze drifted to the entrance of the ballroom, where a discreet but unmistakably expensive banner in shades of navy blue and gold announced Hart Enterprises, 30 years building the future. The name hit her like a punch to the solar plexus, a physical blow that left her breathless. Hart, the empire built by the Hart family, the legacy of her ex-husband, Alexander. A shiver ran down her spine, an electric current of panic that made the baby in her womb stir vigorously, as if sensing the danger. Her first reaction was instinctive. Flee. Turn her back, quicken her pace, disappear into the anonymous crowd of the lobby. But fate, in its cruel theatricality, has an impeccable sense of timing. At the exact moment she turned, the double doors of the ballroom opened, releasing a gust of air conditioning and the figures that haunted her nightmares. They emerged like an apparition, a trio of power and contempt straight from her most painful past. Alexander was in the center, the embodiment of the successful heir. His tailored suit, in a charcoal gray that accentuated his athletic build, seemed molded to his body. His hair, with a light touch of gel, was impeccably combed back, and a public relations smile, rehearsed and empty, adorned his lips. At his side, hanging on his arm like a luxury trophy, was Victoria, the fiancée, the woman for whom she had been traded. She was a spectacle in champagne silk, the dress hugging her gym-toned curves, her tanned skin contrasting with the cold gleam of the colossal diamond ring that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. And one step behind, but with the aura of the one truly commanding the scene, was Mr. Reginald Hart, the patriarch, the architect of her humiliation, a man whose deep, judgmental voice still echoed in her mind, repeating the phrase that had sealed her fate. "Women like you are a detour, a passing whim. My son was born for greatness, and you're just dead weight holding him back from soaring." The corridor, once vast, seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on her. The air grew thick, heavy, hard to breathe. Time froze in that marble hallway. Alexander's eyes, blue and once so full of love, met hers. For a fraction of a second, an eternity, she saw a flash of shock, perhaps even an old, buried guilt. But it was a ghost of emotion, quickly exorcised and replaced by a mask of cold, distant indifference. It was Victoria who broke the spell, her lips curving into a smile that was pure malice, devoid of any human warmth. A predator's smile that had found its prey. Well, well, her voice, a melodic and venomous contralto, cut through the tense silence. The sound echoed down the hallway, causing some passing guests to slow their steps, drawn by the promise of drama. Look who we have here. I thought ghosts from the past didn't usually frequent places so exclusive. The venom in each syllable was palpable. Her gaze, a scalpel, traveled down Sophia's body, lingering with sadistic pleasure on the prominence of her belly. It was a slow scrutiny, calculated to humiliate. Still trying to orbit the heart universe, Sophia. What persistence, even carrying, whatever that is. The insinuation was a razor, brutal, direct, planting the seed of doubt in the air for anyone to hear. That child wasn't his. The humiliation was a wave of heat that rose through her body, burning her face, her neck, the roots of her hair. She felt naked, exposed under the spotlights of their stares and the curious onlookers who now formed a small, silent audience. The baby kicked hard, a visceral response to her anguish. She opened her mouth to respond, to shout the truth, to undo that cruel lie, but her throat closed in a knot. The words died, suffocated by shame and shock. It was then that Mr. Reginald, the master of ceremonies of that public execution, stepped forward. His presence was a force of nature, dominating, overwhelming. He didn't address her. He never addressed her. He looked at his son, but his words were for the audience, for posterity, to seal the narrative he desired. This is a disgrace. His voice, a low and controlled thunder, reverberated with authority. I warned you, Alexander. I warned you that this type of person only brings embarrassment. It's a bottomless pit of awkwardness, and now this scene, showing up here swollen with another man's child just to shame us. Another man's child? The lie, spoken with the conviction of a royal decree, hung in the air and solidified as truth for the spectators. The whispers turned into murmurs of judgment. Poor Alexander, she heard someone say. What a situation, said another voice. Sophia felt the marble floor ripple under her feet. An overwhelming dizziness took her, and black spots began to dance in her vision, like flies on a hot day. She reached out, seeking support on the cold wall, her other hand splayed over her belly, an instinctive, desperate gesture of protection. The air wouldn't enter her lungs. Her chest ached, compressed by a pain that wasn't physical. Every look was a needle, every whisper a cut, stripping her soul, reducing her to a walking scandal. She was no longer Sophia, the promising architect, the woman who once dreamed of a family. She was just the ex-wife, the opportunist, the pregnant woman with an unknown father. A sharp pang, fiercer and deeper than anything she'd ever felt, tore through her abdomen. It wasn't a kick. It was a different pain, a powerful and premature contraction that made her groan, doubling over herself. The panic, icy and overwhelming, finally broke through the dam of shame. Sophia! Jessica's voice, finally reaching her, sounded as if it came from far away. Her friend ran toward her, her face a mask of alarm, pushing anyone in her way. Soph, what happened? Talk to me. But Sophia couldn't form words. The pain blinded her, coming in relentless waves. The world began to spin in a dark spiral. Before the darkness swallowed her completely, her last conscious vision was of Alexander's face. Immobile, impassive. A spectator in his own theater of cruelty, watching her collapse without the slightest gesture of help. The perfect heir, the man who once vowed to protect her, watched her break down as if she were a discarded set piece. In that luxurious hallway, under the golden glow of the chandeliers and the morbid stares of strangers, Sophia didn't just lose consciousness. She felt as if the last fragments of her identity were being stolen, as she was carried away, toward an even more uncertain and terrifying future. The stage of her humiliation was merely being transferred to a new act. The first sound that pierced the veil of unconsciousness was a siren, a shrill and insistent wail that seemed to come from inside her own head. Then came the smell, a chemical mix of antiseptic and alcohol that scratched her throat. Sophia opened her eyes, blinking against a fluorescent light that danced with every jolt of the vehicle. The white metallic ceiling, the padded walls, the nauseating motion. She was in an ambulance. Reality hit her with the force of an impact. At her side, Jessica's face was a blur of concern, her dark eyes fixed on hers. "Easy, Soph. Breathe deep. We're almost at the hospital." Her friend's voice was a thread of calm amid the chaos of the siren and the traffic parting for them. But calm was a distant continent, unreachable. The memory of the hotel hallway returned, not as a movie, but as a physical sensation. The cold of the marble, the heat of humiliation on her face, the sharp pain in her belly. And above all, Alexander's silence. The silence that was louder and more cruel than any insult. She wasn't just a patient in a medical emergency. She was the protagonist of a scandal, a woman whose dignity had been methodically demolished in public. The arrival at Mercy General Hospital was a blur of impersonal efficiency. Gurneys rushing, automatic doors opening, professional voices giving orders. Pregnant, 32 years old, 8 months, blood pressure spike and contractions, syncope. She was a set of data, a case to be solved. They took her straight to the maternity ward, a floor that should have been the territory of hope, painted in pastel tones and decorated with images of smiling babies. For Sophia, however, that place instantly became a prison. A private room intended to offer comfort seemed like a more sophisticated isolation cell. After an eternity of exams, fetal monitoring and blood draws, the on-duty obstetrician, a middle-aged woman with a gaze that mixed competence and fatigue, entered the room. She pulled up a chair, a gesture indicating the news wouldn't be simple. "Sophia," she began, her voice soft but firm. "The episode you had was a serious alarm. Your stress level triggered a hypertensive spike and uterine contractions. It's what we call a threat of preterm labor." The doctor paused, her eyes seeking Sophia's to ensure she was absorbing the gravity of the situation. "We've stabilized the contractions for now, but your blood pressure is still very unstable. The baby's fine, his little heart is strong, but any new stress spike could trigger real labor. And at 32 weeks, every day he stays in there counts a lot." The final verdict came without mincing words. "You'll need to stay admitted, on absolute bed rest, under constant monitoring. We can't risk it. Our top priority now is ensuring the safety of both of you." The word admitted echoed in the silent room. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a sentence. Trapped, watched, exposed. The loneliness, already her constant companion, swallowed her whole, a dark and cold wave. Jessica stayed with her until the last possible minute, delaying her flight by a few hours, trying to fill the silence with words of encouragement and promises. "I'm going to call Michael, my lawyer friend. He's the best. We'll see what can be done about those monsters," she said, anger vibrating in her voice. "And I'll call you every hour. You're not alone, you hear?" But when the door finally closed and Jessica's footsteps faded down the corridor, the remaining silence was absolute and crushing. Sophia curled up in the hospital bed, the thin sheet and rough cotton gown seeming too fragile to protect her. The room, with its impersonal beige walls and view of a concrete inner courtyard, became the stage of her vulnerability. Outside, the world kept spinning, and she could almost hear the buzz of gossip spreading through cell phones and group chats in the city's elite circles. The story must already be polished and adorned with malicious details. Alexander Hart's unstable ex-wife, pregnant by an unknown lover, causes a scandal and faints at a family event. Their narrative, the cruel lie they had uttered with such confidence, was already the accepted truth in the circles that mattered. The hours dragged on, turning into a day, then another. The hospital routine was a monotonous torture. Blood pressure checks at dawn, nurse shift changes, tasteless meals served on plastic trays. The nurses, for the most part, were kind and professional, but Sophia couldn't help noticing the curiosity in their glances. She was the case from the Grand Plaza. She felt like a rare animal in a zoo, an object of pity and whispers. Every time the door opened, her body tensed in a spasm of fear. Would it be a journalist disguised as a flower delivery person? A process server with a slanderous summons from the Hart family? A photographer with a telephoto lens trying to capture her image of desolation? The fear made her isolate herself even more. She kept the TV off, her phone on airplane mode, the window curtain closed. She didn't have the strength to face the massacre of her reputation that was undoubtedly happening online. Her only connection to reality was the constant movement of her son. The kicks, the turns, the small ripples in her belly were powerful and silent reminders of why she needed to endure. She talked to him in whispers, her hand splayed over her abdomen. "We're going to be okay, my love. Mommy's going to protect you. We're going to get through this." They were mantras she repeated to herself, trying to convince herself of her strength, even when she felt like she was disintegrating inside. Jessica called religiously, her voice a breath of fresh air from another planet. She talked about meetings, Chicago traffic, about the lawyer Michael who was already analyzing the case and promised to get in touch. He said what they did is a crime, Soph. Slander, defamation. "There's a lot there," Jessica said, trying to inject hope. But hope seemed an abstract concept, a foreign language Sophia had unlearned to speak. "You need to try to distract yourself," Jessica insisted. "Ask them to bring you books, watch a silly series. Don't stay there ruminating." But how to distract herself when her own life had become a horror drama? How to escape into fiction when reality was more cruel and implausible than any script? Every sound in the corridor was a threat. Every unfamiliar face was a potential enemy. She felt naked, skinless, every nerve exposed. The humiliation was no longer just a memory. It was a chronic condition, a low fever that consumed her slowly. She didn't imagine in her isolation and fear that fate wasn't done with her yet. That hospital, which should have been her refuge, her sanctuary of healing, was about to become the next stage. And the next act of her personal tragedy would be even more public, more cruel, and more devastating than the first. She believed she had hit rock bottom, but fate was digging a new level, especially for her. On the morning of the third day of admission, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the floor woke Sophia from her torpor. It wasn't the routine noise of shift changes or the clatter of the medication cart. It was a different agitation, a current of energy rising through the corridors, composed of louder voices, hurried footsteps, and an electric buzz of anticipation. She pushed aside the untouched breakfast tray and strained her ears. The sound of equipment being dragged, cables being extended, and the unmistakable click of camera shutters being tested made her freeze. A primal fear, cold and sticky, began to climb her spine. That wasn't normal. That wasn't hospital routine. The door to her room opened with a soft creak, and one of the younger nurses, a girl named Sarah, who always gave her a sympathetic smile, entered hurriedly. Her face was tense. "Ms. Sophia," she began, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "I'm going to close your door and the curtain, okay? It's best if you don't leave the room for a while." The urgency in her voice confirmed Sophia's worst fears. "What's happening, Sarah? What's that noise?" she asked, her heart already pounding in a disjointed rhythm against her ribs. The nurse hesitated, biting her lip, clearly uncomfortable. "It's Heart Enterprises," she finally admitted, as if pronouncing the name of a disease. "They're holding an event here, a press conference to announce a donation to the pediatric wing. The hospital couldn't refuse. They're the biggest sponsors." The news crashed over Sophia like an avalanche. There, in the same hospital, on the same floor. The coincidence was so perverse, so cruelly orchestrated, that it could only be the work of fate or, worse, a deliberate demonstration of power by the Hart family. They were marking territory, showing that even there, in her state of greatest vulnerability, she wasn't safe from their influence. They were omnipresent, their power seeping through the walls, contaminating her only refuge. The urge to curl up under the sheets, to become invisible, was overwhelming. But then something stronger, a spark of pure and stubborn indignation, ignited within her. She wasn't a prisoner. She hadn't committed any crime. That corridor was hers too. The air of that hospital belonged to her as well. With an effort that cost her every atom of energy, she pushed back the sheets. "I need some air," she said, more to herself than to the nurse. "Just to the window at the end of the hall." Ignoring Sarah's apprehensive look, she slipped on the worn robe over her hospital gown, put on her slippers, and, using the IV pole as an improvised cane, walked slowly out of the room. Each step, was an act of defiance. She just wanted to see the sky, feel a glimpse of the outside world, reaffirm her existence beyond those four beige walls. But fate, the sadistic playwright of her life, had other plans. As she turned the corner into the main corridor, the scene that unfolded made her stop petrified. There they were, the trinity of her misfortune. Reginald, Alexander, and Victoria, positioned impeccably in front of a large blue and gold Hart Enterprises banner. They were less than 20 feet away, surrounded by a swarm of reporters, photographers, and cameramen. Reginald, with his statesmanlike posture, was speaking into a microphone about the importance of corporate social responsibility, about the company's unwavering commitment to the community's well-being. The words, so noble and hollow, were a profanation in that environment. And then, as if drawn by a magnet, Victoria's hawk-like gaze swept the corridor and found her. The venomous smile Sophia knew so well bloomed on her lips, a bud of malice unfolding. With a subtle touch on Alexander's arm, she made him turn. The initial shock on his face was quickly replaced by a mask of irritation and contempt. Victoria, realizing that Sophia's presence had captured the attention of some more alert journalists, saw her opportunity. She wouldn't waste it. Stepping forward, projecting her voice for all to hear, she distilled her venom. "Look at that, ladies and gentlemen. Our little actress is continuing her personal show," she announced, her tone falsely compassionate. "It seems some people will go to any lengths for 5 minutes of fame, right? Even faking a high-risk pregnancy and checking into a hospital to draw attention." The accusation was so low, so vile and inhuman, that a shocked silence fell over the group. The air seemed to be sucked from Sophia's lungs. The reporters, previously focused on Reginald, turned in unison. The cameras swiveled, their hungry glass eyes focusing on Sophia's fragile figure in her hospital robe, the embodiment of vulnerability. Mr. Reginald, a master at manipulating narratives, didn't miss a beat. He saw the chance to crush her once and for all, to paint her as insane in the eyes of the world. "We deeply regret this inconvenience," he said, his voice heavy with false solemnity. "Unfortunately, as everyone knows, the end of a relationship can be difficult. Some people have trouble accepting reality and resort to desperate and fanciful measures to stay relevant." The message was clear. She was an unstable ex-wife, a pathological liar. The scene was a surreal nightmare being broadcast live. The cruel lines, the incessant flashes blinding her, the murmurs starting to spread among the journalists themselves, some visibly uncomfortable with the brutality of the public attack. Sophia felt the same dizziness from the hotel night, the linoleum floor threatening to open beneath her feet. The pain, a sharp and familiar pang, returned to tear through her abdomen, her body's protest against the emotional violence. She leaned against the wall, her face pale as wax, her eyes wide with incredulity and pain, hot tears rising, threatening to overflow. She was at her limit, about to give in, to retreat to the darkness of her room, to let herself be defined by them, to accept the sentence of madness they pronounced. The spectacle was almost complete, but then a hand grasped hers, firm, warm, an anchor. It was Jessica. She hadn't left. Seeing the commotion on the morning news, she had cancelled her ticket and rushed back to the hospital, sensing the danger. Her eyes, sparking with protective fury, met Sophia's. She leaned in, her face close to her friend's ear, and her voice was a whisper of steel, an order that cut through the fog of panic and despair. "You can't let them speak for you. Enough silence. Soph, it's time to tell your truth." Those words, spoken at that exact moment of annihilation, weren't advice. They were a summons, the truth. The only weapon she possessed, the only thing they couldn't buy or distort. A force Sophia didn't know she had began to bubble from the depths of her soul, an amalgam of righteous anger, fierce maternal love, and an overwhelming desire for dignity. The fear didn't dissipate, but it was subdued by something infinitely greater. She breathed deeply, the air still hurting her lungs, and straightened up, feeling Jessica's hand squeezing hers. The look she returned to the cameras, to her tormentors, to the world, was no longer that of a cornered victim. It was the look of a woman who had been pushed to the abyss and discovered she could fly. The Hart family's humiliation spectacle was about to have a twist that would go down in history. Jessica's whisper was more than encouragement. It was the key that unlocked the cage. For a fraction of a second, Sophia's universe contracted and expanded. The deafening noise of the cameras, the cruel faces of her tormentors, the cold of the wall at her back, everything dissolved into a single point of blinding clarity. The truth. She had carried it like a burden, a shameful secret that isolated and consumed her. Now, in that fraction of a second, she realized that the truth wasn't a weight, it was a weapon, the only one she had, and it was loaded. She looked at the faces before her. Reginald's unshakable arrogance, Victoria's sadistic satisfaction, and Alexander's abject cowardice. They had cornered her, judged her, and condemned her in a media tribunal, certain of their impunity, intoxicated by the power that allowed them to rewrite reality at will. But they had made a monumental miscalculation. They had forgotten that when you push someone to the bottom of the well, that person can use the ground to push back. With a calm she didn't know she possessed, Sophia gently released Jessica's hand. The tremor in her body didn't stop, but now it felt different, no longer from fear, but from pure, potent adrenaline. She forced her spine to straighten, vertebra by vertebra, an act of physical defiance that made her feel taller, more solid. She lifted her chin. The hospital robe, once a uniform of patient, of victim, now transformed into her battle cloak. She took a step forward, away from the safety of the wall, and then another, moving deliberately into the center of the corridor, into the eye of the hurricane. The murmur of the reporters died in their throats, replaced by an electric, palpable expectation. Even Reginald and Victoria fell silent, surprise and irritation stamped on their faces. They expected a collapse, a humiliated flight. They weren't prepared for resistance. Sophia didn't look at them, she ignored them. Her focus was on the dark lenses of the cameras, the glass eyes transmitting her to the world. In those lenses, she didn't see just journalists. She saw millions of people. She saw other women who might be suffering in silence. She saw the chance to turn her personal humiliation into a collective cry. When her voice finally rang out, it came stronger than she expected, cutting through the heavy silence of the corridor. "You want a story?" she asked, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. "You want a spectacle? Fine, I'll give you one. But it won't be the farce the Hart family prepared for today." A collective gasp ran through the small crowd. She had everyone's attention. Slowly she turned, positioning herself in profile to the cameras, her 8-month belly framed by the cold hospital light. Then she raised her arm and pointed a firm finger that didn't tremble directly at Alexander's face. He recoiled a step, as if the gesture were a physical blow. "This baby," her voice rose an octave, vibrating with a conviction that made the air crackle. "This baby they treat like an object of shame. This life they insinuate is a mistake or a lie, has a father. And his father is right there. His name is Alexander Hart." The declaration detonated in the corridor with the impact of a grenade. The chaos was instantaneous and absolute. Shouts, exclamations of shock, questions being hurled from all directions. "What? Is it true, Alexander? Mr. Reginald, this is a serious accusation." The reporters, once passive lambs at the Hart Enterprises event, transformed into a pack of hungry wolves, scenting blood and scandal. The press conference on philanthropy had become, in the blink of an eye, the public trial of the city's most powerful family. Victoria's perfectly made-up face twisted into a grimace of fury. "You liar, desperate viper," she hissed, but her voice was swallowed by the growing tumult. Mr. Reginald, the man who never lost his composure, felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. His face went from tanned to purple red, veins bulging on his temple like ropes about to snap. "Security! Security! Get this unbalanced woman out of here now!" he bellowed, his voice hoarse with panic and rage. But it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle, and there was no putting it back. The truth, once spoken, takes on a life of its own. Sophia remained firm, a rock amid the storm. Her voice rose again, higher, clearer, cutting through the cacophony. "He's not just the father. He's the man who abandoned me when I needed him most. He's the man who, along with his family, offered me money to end our child's life, to have an abortion and disappear so as not to tarnish his good boy image and the bright future his daddy bought for him. Each word was a nail in the coffin of their reputation. She paused dramatically, her eyes locked on Alexander's, who was now white as the wall behind him, paralyzed, his eyes wide with panic, an actor who had forgotten all his lines mid-play. "When I refused," Sophia continued, "when I chose to have my child, they declared war. They decided to destroy me, humiliate me, paint me as crazy, as a gold digger, all to hide their own cowardice, all to protect the lie they live in." The raw emotion and genuine pain in her voice were impossible to fake. There wasn't a hint of hesitation, of doubt. It was the truth in its purest and most devastating form. "I don't have the Hart family empire," she said, opening her arms in a gesture that encompassed her own fragility. The robe, the hospital bracelet. "I don't have expensive lawyers on my payroll. I only have my word, and the life growing and moving inside me." She placed her hand over her belly, a gesture that was both protective and affirmative. "But I make a promise to all of you filming, to every person who will watch this. When my son is born, the truth won't be just my word anymore. The truth will be stamped on his face. And against a DNA test, there's no empire, no lie, and no power that can fight." The word DNA was the silver bullet, the coup de grace. The chaos turned into an absolute frenzy. The journalists, sensing they had the story of the decade in their hands, advanced like a tide, surrounding the Hart family. Microphones were shoved in Alexander's face. "Will you take the paternity test? Is it true you offered money for an abortion?" Cornered, the family attempted a tactical retreat, but it looked like a flight. Burly security guards forced a path, pushing cameramen and reporters. The cameras, relentless, followed them, capturing every second of that walk of shame. Reginald's face was a mask of impotent hatred. Victoria's, a mix of panic and public humiliation. And Alexander, the golden heir, seemed a hollow man, broken, the weight of his choices finally crashing down on his shoulders in real time, for the whole country to watch. While they fled, Sophia remained there, immobile, the calm center of the hurricane she had created. Jessica hugged her, and the tears Sophia had held back so fiercely finally rolled down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation. In minutes, the raw, unedited videos flooded the internet. The headlines on news portals flashed in red. Bombshell. In shocking twist, Sophia Reyes accuses Hart Enterprises, heir of abandonment and coercion for abortion. The hashtag #We'reAllSophia exploded, dominating social media. The narrative, so carefully controlled by the Hart family, had been pulverized. The image of perfection and power was being demolished, brick by brick, live. And Sophia, from that hospital corridor, with nothing but her truth and her courage, had just set fire to the empire. Sophia's declaration in the hospital corridor wasn't a simple accusation. It was an act of demolition. The shockwave, amplified by the relentless speed of the internet, didn't just shake the foundations of the Hart empire, but pulverized them. Before Reginald Hart's armored Mercedes could even navigate the chaotic traffic to retreat to the safety of his mansion, the world he knew and controlled no longer existed. The video, in its rawness and authenticity, was irrefutable. The image of Sophia, pregnant, vulnerable, but with a fierce dignity, contrasted devastatingly with the family's disorderly flight, with Alexander's pale and guilty face and Reginald's uncontrolled fury. Public opinion, that supreme and often cruel tribunal, issued its verdict without hesitation. There was no ambiguity. Their narrative had turned to dust. The scandal, which the media dubbed the Mercy General scandal, exploded with the force of 1,000 suns. Hart Enterprises' reputation, a 30-year work of aggressive marketing, political lobbying, and a carefully cultivated image of philanthropy, disintegrated in a matter of hours. The press conference, planned as a public relations triumph, became a monument to their hypocrisy, a video that would be studied in communications courses as a classic example of how arrogance precedes the fall. The next morning, when the stock market opened, Hart shares plummeted like a stone. The drop was so vertiginous that trading had to be halted twice. Longtime business partners, fearing contamination of their own brands, began issuing press releases, re-evaluating their contracts, and reaffirming their commitment to ethical values. The name Heart, once a synonym for success and power, was now whispered with contempt associated with cowardice, misogyny, and scandal. Inside the walls of the family mansion, the atmosphere wasn't one of strategy, but of panic and recrimination. Reginald Hart, a man who saw himself as a titan of industry, a king in his own fiefdom, was forced to face impotence. In a tense emergency video conference with the board members and minority shareholders, the faces that once looked at him with deference and fear now regarded him with calculated coldness. No one dared raise their voice, but the message, delivered by the lead attorney for the investor group, was brutal in its corporate politeness. Reginald, in the interest of the company's stability and the protection of our shareholders' capital, the board suggests your immediate removal from the presidency. It's a temporary measure, of course, for crisis management. It was a euphemism for a coup. The king was being exiled from his own castle, deposed not by a worthy rival, but by the woman he considered less than nothing. For Victoria, the fall was even more personal, and perhaps more humiliating. Her identity was her image. Her career was being seen, being photographed, being envied. Now her face was everywhere, but associated with the worst captions. Memes portrayed her as the evil stepmother, the calculating shrew. Old videos of her ostentation were re-edited with the cruel speech from the hospital. Luxury brands that paid fortunes to have her at their events terminated contracts with short, dry notes. Her friends in high society stopped answering her calls. The diamond ring, which she once flaunted like a scepter, now burned on her finger like the mark of her association with the most despised man in the country. In a night of fury and panic, she confronted Alexander. There were no tears, just a cold hatred. "You destroyed everything. You and your sick family. I'm not going down with this ship." She yanked off the ring, hurled it at his chest, and by the next morning she was on a private jet, heading to an undisclosed destination, deleting her social media, and vanishing in a desperate attempt to disassociate from the Hart name and salvage what remained of herself. Alexander was left behind, a castaway in the wreckage of his own life, abandoned by his fiancée, functionally disinherited by his father, and turned into a national villain. Desperation made him stupid. He resorted to the only solution his limited mind could conceive: money and manipulation. On a rainy night, bypassing the reinforced security that the hospital, at Michael's request, had placed on Sophia's floor, he managed to reach her room. He looked like a ghost of himself, shoulders slumped, deep dark circles, his expensive suit wrinkled. Jessica and Michael were with Sophia, reviewing some documents, and their presence unsettled him. But he proceeded with his pathetic plan. "Sophia, please, a minute," he begged, his voice hoarse. He extended a folder onto her bed. Inside, a contract, an offer of an astronomical amount, a lifetime pension that would make her a millionaire, a luxury apartment in any city in the world. "I'll give you whatever you want, anything. Just say it was a mistake, record a video. Say the pregnancy stress confused you, that you regret it. Say anything. We can fix this." Sophia watched him, her heart beating with glacial calm. She saw the man she had loved, the father of her child, and felt only a mix of pity and disgust. Without him noticing, she discreetly activated the voice recorder on her phone, which rested on the nightstand. "So, your solution is this, Alexander. You want me to lie to the world, to sell myself, to deny my truth and my sons in exchange for money?" she asked, her voice dangerously serene. "It's not selling yourself, it's being smart, it's resolving," he insisted, falling into the trap like an amateur. "Think about our son. Do you want him to grow up in the middle of this media circus?" "My son," she retorted, her voice cutting, "needs a mother who teaches him the value of dignity, not one who sells it for the best price. He needs a father with character, not a coward who tries to silence the truth with a checkbook." Realizing the bribe had failed miserably, Alexander switched to Plan B, the performance of remorse. His eyes filled with tears that convinced no one. He stepped forward, trying to take her hand. "Soph, I messed up. I was weak, an idiot. I was blind, pressured by my dad, by the image I had to maintain. But all this explosion, woke me up, made me see that the only thing that matters is you. It's you I love. It always was. I want to start over. The three of us. A real family away from all this. The words which once would have been the sweetest music to her ears now sounded like an insult. She yanked her hand back with a brusque movement. The look in her eyes, once full of pain, was now polished steel. My son will have a father on the birth certificate, Alexander. He'll have your name because it's his right. He'll have the child's support the law determines because it's your obligation, she said, each word a hammer blow. But a cowardly husband in my life? Never again. Now get out of my room. She held up the phone showing the recording screen. And if you or anyone from your family dares to contact or threaten me again, this conversation will be the soundtrack to the next chapter of your personal hell. Defeated, unmasked, and doubly humiliated, Alexander backed away, his face a mask of shock and defeat. The door closed behind him, a definitive sound. And with it, closed forever the possibility of any return. Sophia was no longer the woman he had destroyed. She was the woman who refused to stay in ruins, and in the process, demolished his world. The storm, as violent as it had been, finally passed. A few weeks after that rainy night and Alexander's last pathetic attempt, the sun rose on a clear and crisp morning, indifferent to human dramas. And it was on that day, in a calm delivery surrounded by peace, that Ethan came into the world. The instant the nurse placed him in her arms, Sophia's universe reconfigured. The weight of the world, the memory of humiliation, the scar of betrayal, all dissolved in the warmth of that small body against hers. He was perfect. His eyes, a deep blue like Alexander's, gazed at her with an ancient curiosity, and his tiny fingers closed around hers, a promise of a new beginning. In that moment, she knew all the pain, all the struggle, had been worth it. She was no longer a victim of her past, she was the guardian of a future, and she whispered to him the first of many promises, "You are loved, you are worthy, and no one ever again will make you doubt that." While Sophia immersed herself in the bubble of love and exhaustion of motherhood, the outside world continued to deal with the wreckage of the Hart Empire. The fall was slow, bureaucratic, and relentless. Mr. Reginald, stripped of his throne, faced a series of lawsuits. The charge of coercion and defamation filed by Michael on Sophia's behalf was just the first domino. The ensuing investigation, driven by media pressure and the stock plunge, unearthed years of questionable practices, tax fraud and corruption cases that he, in his arrogance, believed were buried forever. The empire he built with iron hands and flexible morals crumbled under its own weight. Alexander, in turn, became a ghost. Stripped of the surname as an asset and the inheritance as a right, he fulfilled the legal obligation to register Ethan, but the process was cold and mediated by lawyers. He was just a name on a document, a shadow in Sophia's past, no longer a presence in her life. Sophia, however, didn't revel in their ruin. Her victory wasn't in revenge, but in liberation. And with liberation came a new sense of purpose. During her hospital stay and in the weeks that followed, she was flooded with an avalanche of support. Emails, letters, social media messages from women from all corners of the United States, each sharing their own story of abandonment, silent struggle, humiliation. They were teachers, lawyers, homemakers, students, women who, like her, had been discredited and left behind. Sophia read every one of those stories, and her personal pain expanded, transforming into a deep empathy and an overwhelming understanding that her case wasn't an exception, but a symptom of a much larger problem. She saw in her journey not just her story, but the story of many. It was this realization that planted the seed of a new idea. With Jessica's unwavering support, who used her network to mobilize resources, and Michael's precise legal guidance, Sophia began to shape a dream. The substantial compensation the court awarded her from the Hart family wasn't used to buy a life of luxury. Instead, she invested it in a purpose. She found an old townhouse, a bit rundown, but with a solid structure and a large garden, in a central and accessible neighborhood of the city. And there, with her architect's knowledge and her new passion as an activist, she began her greatest construction. Anchor House was born, a non-governmental organization dedicated to providing comprehensive support, legal, psychological, vocational, and shelter for single mothers and women in vulnerable situations. The place that should have been a symbol of her financial victory became a beacon of hope for others. Sophia was no longer just Ethan's mother. She was the driving force behind a movement, working tirelessly, often with her son sleeping in a stroller beside her drafting table. In this process of rebuilding, Michael became an indispensable figure. What started as a strictly professional relationship evolved into a solid friendship and silent support. He was the relentless lawyer in court, but also the friend who showed up at the end of an exhausting day with pizza and the excuse that he needed to discuss a detail of the case. He didn't just review contracts, he assembled furniture for Anchor House's nursery. He didn't just advise her legally, he listened to her talk for hours about her hopes and fears for the project. Sophia, still cautious and with her heart in the process of healing, couldn't help noticing the way he looked at her. There was deep admiration in his eyes when she led a meeting, an undeniable tenderness when he saw her rocking Ethan, a genuine respect for her strength and resilience. He never pushed, never made a move that made her uncomfortable. With rare emotional intelligence, Michael seemed to understand that her heart was a garden that needed time for new flowers to bloom. He was simply there, a constant, reliable, and kind presence. And, little by little, without her even realizing it, the defenses Sophia had built around herself began to crumble. The idea of a new love, which once seemed an impossibility, a betrayal of her own independence, began to transform into a distant and perhaps welcome possibility. On a spring afternoon, almost a year after the scandal, Sophia was in the garden of Anchor House. The place was vibrant, filled with the sound of children's laughter and the animated conversation of a group of women in a crafting workshop. Ethan, already taking his first wobbly steps, ran across the grass chasing a butterfly. Michael approached, carrying 2 glasses of juice, and sat beside her on the wooden bench. They sat in silence for a moment, just watching the scene. "You've built something really incredible here, Sophia," he said finally, his voice laden with a sincerity that touched her deeply. She looked at him, a genuine smile, light and free of shadows, illuminating her face. "We built it," she corrected, and in the glance they shared there was a silent promise of shared futures. In that moment, under the warm afternoon sun, Sophia felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She looked at her son, at the house that had become a refuge for so many, at the man beside her, and understood the true dimension of her journey. Her dignity hadn't been returned. She had claimed it. Her worth hadn't been granted. She had built it. She didn't need the heart name, their money, or their approval to be whole. She was Sophia Reyes, mother, architect, founder, a whole woman, owner of her destiny and author of her own luminous story. The future was a blank page, and for the first time she felt an immense and serene joy at being the only one holding the pen. And you? What did you think of the ending of Sophia's story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 for this story in the comments. If stories of overcoming, courage, and twists like this inspire you, then you're in the right place. Subscribe now to our channel and hit the bell, because with every video, we dive together into a new universe of emotions. Here your presence isn't just a number, it's part of our community. A huge hug, and I'll see you in our next story.